Thank you once again for joining us this evening. John Colby gave his presentation on event-driven programming in September. We had a really good introduction overview of the whole idea of using classes, and we realized that in order to look carefully at some of the examples, we needed to have a part two. So John is back tonight to follow up on that. I will let him reintroduce himself to the extent that he feels he needs to. I will say this, that John has been programming with Access since the early 1990s, probably version 1 or version 2, and is one of the first developers who ever really got involved heavily in the classes in VBA, and has written a couple of books or co-authored a couple of books on the subject. Before I turn the time over to him, though, I did want to call out something that's been making waves in the last couple of days, specifically the announcement of the death of VBScript. And Mike Wolf published a blog yesterday on the subject, and there's been a lot of talk back and forth amongst Access people in the last couple of days what this really actually means to us. Does it mean anything at all? We don't really know yet, but I would like to suggest that if you have any interest in the VBScript, you keep your eyes on the announcements coming from Microsoft. Specifically, it says VBScript is being deprecated. In future releases of Windows, VBScript will be available as a feature on demand. And again, we don't really necessarily know what that implies all together, but there are a couple of potential impacts. The scripting runtime is one that's been mentioned. Regular expressions, the file system object, and dictionaries are places where potentially this could have an impact. So if you know any more about that, we would appreciate if you'd share it. And if not, I just, again, suggest you keep your eyes and ears open for any new developments on what that really means.
And pretty much all of those things are well-used items in our programs, so.
Yeah. So again, it may or may not have a huge impact. I don't know if anybody else has any insight that you'd like to share now. To me, it seems like something that, if nothing else, we keep our eyes open, our ears open to see if it's going to come along and impact us. Does anybody else have anything to share on that? I will stop sharing. I will let John share, if you will, his screen. And yeah, now it's just starting to show up. Yeah, there's usually a lag. Okay.
Okay.
Away we go.
Yeah, and I hadn't clicked share, so.
Okay.
All right, so what we're going to discuss tonight is the mechanics of actually using our own classes, events, and raising and syncing events out in our own classes. In the last meeting, there was a big, long discussion on the mechanics. What do we do? How do we raise them? How are they sunk? And so forth. And we didn't get around to discussing it. So I thought I would focus on that, because if you can't use them, you can't use them. So let's get that handled. Then we can move on from there. So basically, I wrote this section discussing events, raising and syncing. And well, I hate to do this, but I'm just going to start talking about this. So to further discussion, I will document what was discussed and some other things that were not discussed. So under normal circumstances, we will create events directly in the code behind form class. Most often we do this by opening the property sheet for a form or a control on a form, and then double clicking in an event. And I will be, hang on a second while I, F11. I need to get my code window open here as well. So, okay, so that allows me to look at that, and we'll go back here. Okay, so most of the time, most developers do this all the time. They will open a code window, they'll open a database, and they'll look at something. They'll say, hey, I'm going to go in and look at this thing, and you'll view the properties. Yeah, we got the properties here. So most of us are used to this. And we all just, anybody that uses this stuff at all learns, hey, I want an on-click event. And they'll double click that and they'll hit the ellipsis and boom, you're taking it by VBA, you're taken in here and you've now magically got a form click event. And you can write anything you want in there. And something happens. Okay, so we all know how to do that. So you double click, go in, start coding. When you do that, the Access Code Editor takes over and creates an event stub in the code behind form, i.e. the forms class. Double in the property causes Access to create the exact verbiage. And this is what I'm talking about here. Event procedure in the property. It is the existence of this precise verbiage in a property that causes Access to raise that event. Well, let me go back over here. If this does not exist, the event will not be raised. So if I delete that back out again, now that event on the click event won't happen. It won't be raised. So we all learn how to do that. I'm going to double click that and then I'm going to hit the ellipsis and Access creates the event stub. And where does it create the event stub? It creates it in the forms class. You've got a control on the form and all this stuff is dropping code into the forms class. And that's an important thing to understand is that VBA is making our life easy for us by doing all this stuff for us. But if you come back over and look at the actual code window, so it's the existence of this precise verbiage in a property that causes Access to raise that event. In other words, if open parent event procedure close parent exists in an event property, then that event will be raised. I think we discussed this at the end of the last discussion 2 months ago. So Access creates that exact verbiage in an event property, and then click the ellipsis on the right of the property will cause the code editor to open. I just demonstrated that, and an event sync to be created in the code behind form. So the code editor knows, hey, this thing, this command button, this combo box or whatever it is, exists in this form. So let me open the code window for this form and drop an event sync into the code window for this form and allow the developer to do his thing. And it's all magic, just magic. But we all learn how to do that, and we don't even think about it really. The following event stub is created. So if I do the form activate, if I double click and form activate, and that would be up here someplace. Anyway, if I double click and form activate, it's gonna create the activate event. Now, the thing to know though is that the other place that you can go to find these things is in here. So these are all those event properties that, that we see here. All of this stuff here is this stuff here. So now if I come in here and I create something, boom, a form event is created by the VBA editor. It's helping us. And that's really cool. I mean, you know, it creates this event stub for us, and I can just say, you know, debug print. And boom, I've got something printed in the debug window when the form current event happens. Very cool. I don't have to write the event stub to do that. Okay. So we talked about some of this stuff last time, but I just wanted to kind of go back over it again. So whatever you click into, double click and hit that ellipsis, that event stub will be created in the code behind form, where either for that form itself or for a control on that form. And it's inserted into the class, the forms class. And the insertion pointer is placed in the new event stub. That's what I just demonstrated. Did everybody get that? You know what I'm doing. If anybody did not, say, please do it again.
No, I think we got that. That's good.
Okay. Okay. So now any code desired can be inserted into the event stub, and when that event fires, such code will be executed. So as an example, I can just put in debug print hi there, and when form activate happens, hi there will be put into the immediate window. I can do anything I want in there, obviously. If you do not place any code in the event handler, the next time you do a compile, the empty event handler will be cleared up. The editor will take the event stub back out of the forms class. So if I come over here and I delete this and I do a debug compile, notice that that event stub just went away. So it's very nicely cleaning up for us for code, because it's saying, hey, they're not using it anyway. Let's get rid of this thing. So it is the presence of this thing, event procedure between square brackets, in a given event property that causes the property to be raised. If that event procedure text is deleted back out of the property, the event will no longer be raised. The event sync itself will not be deleted, however, unless it's empty. If it's empty, it will be deleted when you debug compile. If it's not empty, even if you debug compile, it'll still be there. But without that event procedure between the square brackets, the event will never be raised. And so the code can never execute. Okay, so let's assume that there's a control named command 22 on the form. I double click in command 22's click event and click the ellipsis, and sure enough, command 22 underscore click is created by the code editor, and the insertion pointer is placed in there and said, hey, Mr. Developer, you said you wanted a click event. Here's your click event. Now do something. So you can write code in there. So the event stub, this thing right here is an event stub. This is going to be called when the click event is raised, if and only if that open square bracket event procedure close square bracket. Sorry, my mouse is hitting stuff on my desktop here. Only if that stuff exists. If that stuff doesn't exist, the event will not be raised. But if I have put anything in here, including just a comment, when I do a debug compile, it will not be cleared back out again. So the event stub will remain. Okay, so I can write debug print hi there into the event stub. Now if I open the form and click that, my code will run and hi there will be printed into the debug window. Now this is important. If I rename my command button to from command 22, because we all know that Access very helpfully creates a nice name for us of command 01, command 02, et cetera, et cetera. So what do? We go, oh, that's a silly name for something. So I'm going to name it something real, like command hi there. So I go in and I rename this to command hi there. The event stub that was created, command 22, is orphan. It still exists, assuming that there's code inside of it so that it's not cleared out when you do a debug compile. If there's code in it, it'll still be there, but it will never be raised because it's orphaned. It's now command 22 is not anything real. It's not a real object on the form anymore because I renamed command 22 to command hi there. And now there won't be a command hi there click event unless I go back out property and double click in command hi there and go back in with the ellipsis and come back in again. And then all of a sudden the editor will say, oh, okay, command hi there needs a click event. So I'm going to create one and it'll create it. And then you will now have a command hi there event stub, which is just this thing without this thing. This is called an event stub if there's no code in it. Once there's code in it, it's no longer called an event stub. Anyway, so obviously the button is no longer named command 22, and so an event stub for command 22 is no longer hooked by any object on the form. When I say hooked, I mean when an event for whatever that thing is now called is raised, the execution will not go into this thing because this thing by that name no longer exists. That thing has been renamed to command hi there. So command 22 doesn't exist anymore. And its click event now can't be hooked by the thing behind the scenes. I don't know if you guys are familiar with C#, but in C# you can actually see these event hooks out in the code. You can see where the stub and the execution are paired up in C#. But in VB, you can't really see that part of it. But anyway, I rename my command button from command 22 to command hi there. This becomes orphaned. It doesn't point back to a command button anymore as I renamed that command button. And so when I click the command hi there, the button is clicked, but the button is no longer called command 22, and there's no event stub now called command hi there because the editor didn't change it automatically or auto-magically for us. It just orphaned the old code, and now there's no new code. But if you are out in this editor here and you go back in and you click some event and you click that ellipsis, at that point, the VB editor will create a brand new event stub for command hi there, click event, and now there will be something to hook. But all that code, if you might have had 30 lines of code out there in command 22 click, and when you renamed it, all that code was orphaned and a new event stub will eventually be created, but our code is over here. So you're now going to have to manually go back, and you could literally just take this and copy it in here, overwrite this, and boom, you now have something to hook again. There's a command hi there click in my code behind form, and all of a sudden when that click event happens, this code would start to run again. But the editor itself does not do that for you. It doesn't rename this thing, it orphans this thing and creates a new click event or whatever for new name command hi there. The bottom line with all this is when you create controls on your forms, before you insert any code in them, before you create any event stubs, rename the thing, because command 22 doesn't mean anything. And as a programmer, we want valid names for things. And so if you do all your programming and you go, oh yeah, command 22, that's not a good name. Let's rename it. You just orphaned all your code. So before you do that, before you put code in here, go to your command 22 button out in the property sheet and rename it to whatever you want to be named. And now when you start creating those event syncs over here in the code behind form, they'll be named something real. They'll be named this, and all your code will run because the event syncs will be pointed to the right place. Does that make sense? Is everybody good with that? I don't hear any.
Sounds good.
I don't hear
Yep,
anything.
good.
Okay.
We're good.
All right. Okay. So in addition, and this is something cool, in addition to the method described above, whenever an object is dimensioned with events in a class, right, like this, private with event m command as command button, immediately an object is inserted into that left combo box at the top of the editor. I'm going to come back over here, and this combo box has all of the things that are out on that form. So if I create something at the top, F-class date range as with events, notice that in here I should have an F-class date range right here. This is that thing up at the top of my class, this thing right here. If I were to comment this out, so that no longer exists, right? I come back in here, F-class date range no longer exists. The editor very helpfully takes it out, doesn't exist. But if you have event hooks for that thing down in your code, the event hook still exists. The editor doesn't take it out unless you don't have any code in that event hook. If you don't have any code, including just a simple comment, if you have even a simple comment, the editor will not take that orphaned code back out again. But when I comment this thing out, any code in there for events for this thing is now orphaned. Events can hit it because this thing has just been commented out. Now, notice that F-class date range doesn't exist, right? So if I come back in here and I uncomment this back out again, guess what happens? Yep, back over here, F-class date range now exists again. Now, the other half of this is F-class date range has one and only one event that that class has told us about, and that is combo after update. So if I click that, combo after update right here, right? So if I just click this, the VB editor will create a brand new event stub for us for, yep, see the underscore here. It'll create a new event stub for us and we can start filling it in. So, but the class, out in the class, it has to exist. I mean, I can't just come in here and put something in it. This thing has events inside of that class, and the one and only event for that currently exists is combo after update. So out in that class, this class right here, there is one event called combo after update. And this is an event that I created. I'm raising that event, okay? So this F-class combo after update is being raised by my F-class date range. It's raising this event someplace in my code out there. I mean, I raised the event using a raise event keyword. And when I hit line of code, execution is transferred into this class right here and will run into this thing and start executing this code. So, okay. we've just seen that this WithEvents command as command button line of code up here at the top allows us to sync events for something. And in this case, that something is a command button. So because it's a command button already has a whole bunch of events, right? So we can go in, let's take the form as an example since that exists. This form right here, all these events, right? And event form click, I've got form open. Well, if I were to just say, hey, I need a delete event or a dirty event, and I click that, the editor goes, okay, here's your form dirty event, and it creates an event stub for you for a dirty event. And you can come in here and do whatever you want. All I have to do is put in a comment, and that locks it down. It prevents a decompile compile or a debug compile from taking it back out again because there's code in there. If I take this out and I do a debug compile, that event was empty and the VB editors, oh, well, he doesn't need it anymore, so let's take it back out because there's no code inside of it. Any code at all inside there will lock it in place. And then if that event is raised on the form for the form itself or the control, whatever it is that you're generating event for, then control will be transferred into that thing. So let's take the delete event as an example. I can create a delete event here, and I can do stuff. When the form gets ready to delete something, I can cancel a delete, right? I can just pass back true when this thing exits, and the delete will not happen. It'll cancel. So I could that right there, when the delete happens, we'll just cancel the delete, and it won't happen. So if I go back over form now, I should have a delete. Is this the form? No, that's the, yeah. There should be a, oh, it might be on delete. On delete. See the event procedure there? Guess what put that in? This thing here was put in by the editor when over here I created this form delete event stub. If I click this, eat this back out again, do a debug compile, that goes away. Notice this thing does not go away. I would have thought that it would have, but there's no event. So the event will be raised. And remember, we had this discussion before. It's the presence of this exact verbiage in the property that causes an event to be raised, but there's no event stub for control to be transferred. So yeah, the event will be raised, but it won't go anywhere. If I back in here and which one was that? Delete? Oh, delete is gone now. So anyway, if I hit delete again on delete, that. And you can see they're kind of out of sync, but that's what's going on. Basically, the editor itself is being helpful to us, the developers, and nice because doing all this stuff manually is a pain in the butt, especially if you're going to try and do private. What was that again? Form underscore. Was there a cancel? Trying to remember all that stuff would be mind-boggling. So the fact that the VB editor does all this stuff for you is wonderful. But notice that on delete now has an event procedure. I'm thinking that something behind the scenes, and I don't know what, but someone's watching. Did I click in here? Something's causing this to be set because it wasn't set just a minute ago. So the VB editor is doing all this fancy stuff for us. Any questions before I move on?
Just a note,
All right.
John, and that's
Yes.
sometimes there actually is something back there and the property sheet loses the event procedure.
That's possible. I mean, the thing to know is that I've got this delete thingy, and I put a comment in there, and if we do a debug compile now, it doesn't go away. Okay, and this thing doesn't go away. And if I were to open this form and I was to delete a record, this event would fire because this exists. So I did not write VB itself, VBA, so I don't know what really goes on behind the scenes. But what I do know is that if I delete that, the event is no longer raised. It's no longer fired. And therefore, control can never get to this thing. It still exists. And if I come in here and try and do a debug compile, it says, hey, I'm fully compiled at this point. But it didn't take this out because it said, hey, he's got something in there. This is important to him. I'm not going to delete it back out again. Now, if I do that and I come back into debug, it should say, hey, okay, let's compile that. Notice this thing doesn't have anything in it already because I physically deleted it out. I swiped it delete. But now if I hit compile, this is just going to disappear.
Right. But my point was sometimes, and it's happened to me, where I've written code and just the bracket event procedure bracket just disappeared from the property sheet and nothing happened. And I go and I see, oh, my code's here. Why not? And then I see that it disappeared on the property sheet. And so all you have to do is just hook it up again.
Yeah, all you really have to do if you want is to come into the click event, the on delete, and double click.
The other thing here that's going to be important is that you can actually put code in that event behind the form. And when you with your subclasses that you're using, both the form, the code you've already written in the form and what you put in the subclass are both going to run. So it doesn't run instead of, it runs as well as. I haven't figured out which one runs first.
Would you say that again?
Both
please?
run.
Would you say that again for me, please?
If you put code behind the form here, right, instead of just a comment, and you put code there to do something,
right,
with your class that's going to run, the code that you put here will run as well as the code you've got in the class.
If you have your own class talking about?
Yeah, if you put code in here, and you've subclassed this form with your subclass for your controls, and you've got a code in the event in the subclass, then the code you write here and the code in the subclass will both run.
That's correct. And in fact, we're going to get to that in a moment, but an event is raised by whatever owns the property. Okay, so this on delete is an event that is owned by the form. So when the delete event fires in the form raises the event, the delete event, and anybody who has hooked that event, which is a term for creating this event hook and putting code out there, anybody who's hooked it will eventually get control. And I discussed this in a minute, I think, in my document. Back in the late 90s or early 2000s, the order that the event sync was initialized in code, and the event that the sequence that they would fire in swapped from reverse to first to first to last, last to first to first to last,
Yeah, I
sometime
saw
around
that comment.
the year 2000. Okay, so I believe what happens today, and I'd have to test this, and I could do that, but is that the form opens. It's obviously, if it's got code in it for a command button, command click, if it's got code in it, it's going to be the first one to dimension that button, hook the event. It's the first one to hook the event. If you now create a class and pass in that same command button to a class, and you store it up in your header with events, and you own that class or instantiate that class, that is the second instance of something that is hooking that command button click event. So the form opens, it's first, obviously. I mean, it goes, and so I think that as the click event happens, control is passed first to the form if there is one in the form, and there doesn't have to be one in the form. But if there is one in the form, it will execute first. And when it's all done and it comes out the end, then the event will say, hey, is there anybody else that's hooked me? And the class over there goes, yep, I hooked you, and control will pass to that class's event hook for that command button. And you can do that once for another class, or you can do that 100 times for that same command button.
But the other thing to consider here is that because the class is going to overwrite the event with event procedure, if you were calling a macro in that event, the macro won't run, only the code in the class will.
That's absolutely true. And a lot of developers will call a function. You can just call a function from those events, function open parent, close parent, or even passing in something, I think. I don't do that, but you can do that. And if I'm overriding that with event procedure so that I get the code hook, the event stub in the class to receive control, well, I just overwrote whatever was in that property. So there is that. I mean, you got to be careful.
You'd have to store that in advance before you overwrite it, and then restore it after you're done using it.
Well, you could do that, I suppose, but I'm not exactly sure how to ever get control to go back to whatever it was that was in there.
One of the times that does happen is if you're playing around in code and you're changing code behind the form, your form class can get lost, in which case, and this is only when you're really doing development, you're hacking around in code. I actually put code behind a button that will run to reinstantiate the form class, but only if it's been lost.
The only way that I know of that the forms class can even be lost is there's a property on the form that we talked about last time. I don't even remember the name of the property because I don't ever use it. But that property being true says, hey, I have a class behind me.
Has module on the other tab.
What's that?
It's has module on the other tab.
That's correct. Has module. Yeah. So the has module property set to true tells the editor, hey, this form has a class, and you need to load it when the form loads. So if you just create a form and you don't create something in code behind the form, those are called lightweight forms, and they're lightweight because they don't have a class behind them. And as soon as you do anything where the editor creates an event for something or whatever, the editor creates the class, creates the event stub, and sets that property to true. And now it's no longer a lightweight form. It has a class behind it. Now, if you come in and you've got all your code in that class behind form and you set that property to false, has class to false, and save it, save the form, you just lost all that work. I've never had a case where that property was set to false when I had set it to true, unless some other programmer was fiddling with it or something. I mean, I've never seen that happen.
You know, and
Has
I
somebody
do
say-
that sometimes, John, if I copy a form and I just really want to quickly delete all the code behind it. I mean, I could go and do a
Oh,
control A.
sure.
You know,
You could do that.
it's just quicker to say it doesn't have a module.
Right. Yeah, you're right. I never thought about that, but sure. You create a form that's got all this formatted stuff on it and you want to use that. You just say false, has module false. And behind the scenes, there's no class there anymore. And you open that form in design view and start using it, double clicking in a property and hitting the ellipse. Boom, you've now automatically got a class behind the form, and the editor sets that property to true, has module to true for you. You don't have to do that. The VB editor is trying to help us, and it does a very good job of that. And I'm very happy that it does all that stuff behind the scenes because it makes my life easier. But just be aware that if you set that to false and you got a bunch of stuff in there, well, you just lost it. All right. Okay, so what I was trying to say here is that up at the top of this combo box, there's the word general. And normally when you open this class behind the form, that will be the default. It'll say the word general. And this will say declarations. And notice there's none under there because this is not a real thing. So if you click something, then drop this down and you can see all the event properties for whatever this thing is here. Anything over here will have stuff over here, and you can just come over here and say, hey, I want a dirty event, and you can start writing code in there. And you can do that from here. A lot of us, we're kind of trained to come in and double click and hit the ellipsis and do all that stuff. And I have to tell you, for some reason, I'm not able to double click in here. I'm trying to figure out what's going on there. But anyway.
John, the reason you can't double click in there, I believe, because they are the properties from within your VBA editor. If you go to the same properties for the same object in your form designer.
In the design view of the form. Okay. Over here. Sure. I got it.
Or if you Or if you just type an open bracket in there, because if you drop the list, it'll choose event procedure. So just open bracket chooses it. The interesting thing, if you delete bracket event procedure bracket for something on your form, then when you go to the code behind the form and you go to general, then you will see it when you're at the top of the form or in the general part. You'll see the names of things that should be hooked up, or maybe you changed the control name and now you need to change your procedure name to kind of match your new control.
Right. And one of the things that I ran into as I was doing this stuff, I would pretty routinely change the name of a combo box or something. From combo 123 to combo my best car, to whatever I wanted it to be called. And all of a sudden, I've got all these events that aren't hooked anymore. And when you do that, I'm going to show you. If I were to go into, let's go into here. And I go into this thing and I change this to, what have I got events? I've got an after update here, right? So if I come in here and I change this to text 123, Now, when I come back into the editor for that, I should now have a text 1, 2, 3 in here, but I'll have events that as I scroll down through them, it's like, oh, it doesn't say anything up. It just says general. When I scroll up into something that's no longer hooked, this will just say general. Why? Because it's not hooked up to anything anymore. Because I changed the name of that something. So, and I would actually use that when it was time to clean up stuff. I would just scroll down through this thing going, am I finding the word in general? Okay, that general right there. Yeah, I need to do something with that. So just because I'm lazy. Back over here, I don't remember what the text box was called anymore. How about I just save it and say no? Okay.
Quick question for you, John.
Yes.
Raised in the chat. Mike Cralo wants to know, you had the name of an item, with events item, FCLS blah, 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 back where you were. He wants to know what the F part of that stands for.
Well, I had this naming convention. I understand that I haven't worked in Access in any of this stuff since about 2012, but basically I had form level, I had module level, I had local level. So you'll see L would be a local. It would be something inside of a function. I'd have L out in front of it, you know. And then F, because hey, it's global. Sometimes I'd have G up there. It's been many years ago that I did all this stuff. So it's just a name convention. You can call it anything you want. And that's the thing is, as long as I hook everything back up again, if it's called F class or class or whatever, it's just nothing more than a naming convention. So down here, it's called F class. If I come up here and I change this to class, this will give us a good example. As soon as I click off of that, now there's a class. Now, if I come down here and I click in here, notice that it says general here now. It no longer says that it belongs to the object F class because F class doesn't exist anymore. I just renamed it.
Why don't
So
you
if I come back,
add your class modules in the properties on the left? You click on the plus sign on the class modules to show what the class names are.
over here.
Right, down, yeah.
So class message TD is predefined, I think is what I meant by that. Class message predefined. So it's a predefined. You don't have to dimension it. You don't have to set it equal to something. It's predefined.
Cool. So John,
yes,
we're close to our hour, and
okay,
I'm feeling like one of the things we haven't yet seen is actually instantiating and using one of these classes. Can you do that?
Why, yes, I can.
And take us to the end.
Yes, I can.
And then we can have a discussion, and anybody that wants to hang around and talk about some of these other issues at the end. But I'd kind of like to see it in use. Thanks. And as always, I don't stop right at 6:30 or 7:30, but we'll give people a chance.
Okay, so this is the code behind form for form message 1. Form message 1, message 2, message 3, and message 4 are pretty close to identical. Form message 1 initializes and cleans back up again the other one. So when I go into design to form view here, notice it said, oh, okay, well, I'm going to close them here in the close, and I'm going to open them here. So that's that. So how do you use these things? Well, the first thing that you have to do is with some private or public or whatever, you can just use dim. Private simply says nothing outside this class can see it. WithEvents says this thing can raise events, and we're going to be able to sync them. And this is the name of it. As this is the name of the class. So over here, I've got a class message predefined. That would be somewhere over here. That one right there. That's class predefined. So inside of this, up at the top of the form, the class behind the form, I said, hey, I want a private, nothing else can see it from outside this thing, with events. It's going to be able to sync events for this class inside of this form. This is the name of the object. And typically, I just put whatever the name of this is plus something like this is form level as something. So F class message predefined as class message predefined. And the same thing here, private with events, command sync test as command button. So these two lines are how we tell the compiler we've got two objects in this thing that are going to be receiving events. We can raise events without this with event thing, but the with events tells us this object will be allowing us to receive events or sync events from this thing. And this thing is this type of thing. This thing is this type of thing. Okay, so this is the syntax, and that's all you do. Again, if you comment one of these things out, then anything associated with that is orphan. And if you go down through it and find something associated with that, it will now say general up here instead of F class message PD. So come back in, uncomment it out. That all, and all that's doing really is putting it in this list and hooking any events that are raised by this thing, saying, hey, is there an event sync in this class for an event? And in this particular case, there's only one event that this thing raises. Command sync, on the other hand, command sync test, that's a command button. So you come over here and look, well, you got all those events that command buttons can raise. We have only created an event sync for one of them, the click event. But all I got to do is say, hey, I also want the enter, and I'm going to put a comment in there, and that'll lock it down. I also want the exit. Where the heck is the exit? Down here somewhere. Anyway, you get the picture. Double click. Let's just call it that. And so it creates the event sync for me, and I lock it down, and now those things exist. And notice up here, they're in darker. And that's exactly what happens when you go back over to the form in design view and double click in the property and hit the ellipsis and come in here. Exactly the same thing happens. So that's how you use them. There's no magic to it. You either go to the property in the object, whether it's a form or a command button or a combo box. In design view, you'll see all the properties. Double click, it'll create that square bracket event, close square bracket, hit the ellipsis, and at the instant you hit the ellipsis, the editor will create the event hook over here in the code behind form. And from that point forward, the event being raised by that object, whatever that event is, and that object is, the code will transfer control into the class for behind the form. Okay. So Okay, so I wanted to show that, well, I had it all set up to hook the sync test. Oh, sigh.
What was it supposed to do?
It was supposed to put into text status a message. So this thing down here was supposed to put in this form and in another form. Open this thing in design view, in form view. It opens all these other things. And now when I click this, I'm supposed to be getting text in here and I think over
Right,
in one of
okay.
these other things. Okay. But not all four of them because I only passed the pointer to one of the forms and hooked it in one of the forms. So that's what it was
Okay.
supposed to do. Obviously, let's see if any of this is working. Yeah, so now when I type in something here, this thing says, hey, form message 1 says ASDF. Okay. And here, oh, this thing replied to it. And here, this thing got a message from this thing. So I was trying to show, and I don't know why it's not working because the event sync is back there, that when you clicked on this, in fact,
It's a live demo.
right you are.
Yeah.
So I right now I've got this thing hooked, right? The click is hooked. I've got a breakpoint in there. I might need to do a debug compile, to so right now behind the form, this code should be running because, well, it's there, it's here. I've got an event hook for it. This thing, oh, you know what might happen? What might have happened is this thing, hang on a second. If this thing lost its, now it's got on click right there. Well, let's go back in and see if it'll work now.
Listen.
Nope. I don't know.
That is
Access.
bizarre.
Well,
Because
it
it
is
does. It
bizarre.
looks like it should work.
yeah.
Yes. But you
Well,
can
it
do a
did work
decal,
for me in
compile,
my demo.
compact. You can do a decompile, compile, compact, and repair, and magically this kind of stuff just starts working again.
John.
That's why we.
Yeah.
Yes.
John,
Yeah.
when I opened this form message 1 from the nav pane, it did work all right for me. But when I tried to open it from your menu, it just crashed the entire application. So there could be some little bug in it.
Yeah. I had the same experience, Kent, earlier today when I was testing it. And by the time I talked to John a couple hours later, it was working again. So I think a compile, or decompile,
compile, compact, repair,
would correct it. Yeah. I think that's
Form.
the case. Yeah. But we're kind of at the end of our allocated
Our time.
So
Sure, absolutely.
if there's something else that somebody has a particular question about or something else we'd like to see, we can entertain that. Okay.
I just want to give John kudos for the book that he wrote, because I mean, I went through that and I mean, I learned a bunch of stuff up from that. And so I'm hoping he writes some more of these things, and especially about the framework. That's going to be, that'll be really interesting too.
So this whole section right here that I just am was working my way through was written in response to our questions last time. And this is not in that book. And I mean, it's real stuff that wasn't really explained. I don't think it was even explained in that book. So as I do these kind of things, I end up having to go back in and edit the book and add in a new section. It's been pointed out to me that it's really just a white paper. It's not a book yet. It's 65 pages or something like that,
Okay.
But
Yeah.
it grows, and then I, put it to bed, and then I go back in and work on it, and it grows a little more, and then I put it to bed.
Yeah. John,
So,
can we take a couple of
yes.
questions?
Absolutely.
All right.
Yeah,
So first of
let's take
all,
questions.
there's one here from James Spellman. James, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question so I don't mess it up for you? Tom.
Yeah, over the years, it seems like there are certain events that would be useful that aren't included. Like I mentioned, the before delete and after delete, which again wasn't the same as on delete, and can be bypassed, things like that. Or if there's any possible way to tap into the Windows I don't know, event handler to take some control out of it, or is it just wait for Microsoft to add more events for us? And what other events people have found missing that they'd like to see?
Yeah, so the answer to that is there's no way for me to do it. And no, there's no way for you to ask them to add it in because they're done with this. Oh, that's my personal opinion.
I'm sorry, John.
Right. Tom, do you want to ask your question next? Please.
Okay, my question is about, hey, John, you have worked with C#, and I'm sure that you know about observable collections. Those are collections that raise events when elements are added or removed. How would we implement something like this in VBA?
Well, so we've got a collection object, and the collection object can be created. In fact, I use them everywhere in my framework. I use collections everywhere. So the way that you would have to do that is create a class that wraps the collection object. And this is why I asked the question in the original, whether people wrapped objects from VBA with our own classes and expanded them. Because if I wrap a collection and I put a collection in the top of the thing and I start using it, I can write a function in my class that I then call from outside my class that says, hey, add something to this collection. And then before I add it to that collection, I can raise an event called before add, collection before add, or something like that. I can call it anything I want. So I raise inside of this class that I've just wrapped the collection with, I raise an event. And now outside the class, you can sync that event and go, they're about to add something to this collection, but I need to do whatever, XYZ. So that's the answer. You wrap anything at all in a class, and then you add you raise your own events when something's about to happen that you think is important, or after something happens that you think is important, or just when something that your class is doing you think is important. You can raise events. And then your class is in the place of that collection. Instead of just using the collection, you use your class, and you can expose all of the collection's properties directly. Using properties, you can just expose them so that the external person can use those properties, or they can go through your stuff, your code. You can not expose them, so they can't get at it directly. They have to use whatever you've given them in your class.
Oh, here's a question. I'm sorry, but one thing that we don't have is I want to do this before the record changes to current. Is there some way that you've managed to control that? Because we have
never
the
tried.
current event, but we
Right.
don't have the I want this to happen before it goes to the next one.
You have to find the object. If there's a record, if you dimension a record set, let's say, in a class, and you set the record set equal to the forms record set, right? So now inside your class, you dimension that object with events. So you can see the events that are being raised by that record set object. And when the current event happens or the save event happens, you can see it in your class, and you sync the on current or on save or on before delete, you delete or whatever it is. You sync that in your class, and before you perform that thing, you rate it saying, hey, I'm giving you a warning, this is about to happen. And now you use your class, and you've just raised an event before that event that you're trying to get in front of can happen. You know what I'm saying? Do you understand me?
Not really. I mean, I understand you theoretically, but I wouldn't even begin to know how to put that into practice. But it is something that I think Access is lacking.
Yeah, well, so you can wrap any object whatsoever. The only ones that are really useful, though, typically are the ones that have events, because, well, I'm all about event processing. But a record set, what was your example? One more time. I want to see when.
Right. So let's say you have a find combo at the top of a form where you're going to, just a simple example, where you're going to make it go to another record. And, the first thing I do is, save it if it's dirty. But what I'd like to be able to do is I'd like to be able to sometimes trap that before the current event. So before it actually makes the next record current, I'd like to be able to maybe do something to the record that I'm already on just before it leaves, but we don't have an event like that.
Right. Well, the current event is going to fire, right? And if you've got a class wrapping the form,
but it'll already be on the next record when that fires.
Yeah, so the old value won't be relevant anymore.
Indeed, but you can't do anything about that because that's Access's job is to provide events for things on a form, for instance.
Well, that's why I thought I'd ask John. Maybe he knows how to do it.
Well, he's Access, is he?
Well, if you had a class that you're not using the standard record set anymore. I believe this is what John is saying. You're not using the standard record set anymore, but you're using your own class, my record set. And it has a .move method. And you say, well, before we move, we're first going to raise an event, which you can listen to and say, do I really want to move? Or do I really want to maybe update some other table before I move? Or do I want to cancel this event even?
Yeah, no, I get that.
I believe you have that option.
Right. I think that would be a really interesting presentation.
Do we have...
I'm always looking for presentations. I think Crystal just volunteered Tom to do it.
No, I don't know how.
Well,
seriously, I'm going to step in here. We're over our time. I would love to continue the conversation, but I think I want to stop the recording. So we'll be from here on in. We'll be off the record.
Off the record.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.